I'm getting ready to remove the gearbox cover. It's held in place by these two long metric bolts here, which are a little bit tedious to remove, so I have seen people have converted these to thumb screws to make it a little bit easier to get them on and off. But you don't normally have to go in here very often, only when you're going to change your threading gear setup or possibly to do some lubrication. But let's take a look at what we've got here. These are the gears that drive the lathe, or the lead screw of the lathe. And let me zoom in and get a closer look at that. Now in this upper portion here we have the lathe spindle, and it has a hole here. We talked about that earlier, that it's hollow all the way through to the chuck, and for that reason you can run long stock through the spindle. And you can see there's a gear around the periphery here, and then this pair of white sort of nylon gears here called the Tumbler gears, or sometimes the Tumbler reverse gears. And what they do is control the direction of lead screw rotation. There's this lever on the back of the lathe, and you don't normally see it unless you come around to the back, but it has a knurled handle that's spring-loaded, and you grip that and pull back on the knurled part of it, then you can lift it up or down. And there are three detents. When this lever is operated, what it does is rotate these two white gears in and out of position. When the larger gear is engaged, the lead screw runs in the forward direction, and when the smaller gear is engaged, the lead screw runs in the reverse direction. And then there's this neutral slot, which neither of these two gears is driven by the spindle, so the lead screw does not rotate. Now down below here we have a gear train that is driven from these white gears, and then there's a set of gears here that you can change, and they're called the change gears, and you can set up different combinations of gears for different thread pitches. Most of the time, if you're just using it for power feed, you'll have these two large 80-tooth gears in place, and they come in place as the lathe is shipped from the factory. Then there are the two smallest gears that you may be able to see here. A little bit tricky to see those with this lighting. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. These two small gears drive the two larger gears, and with the two small gears driving the two large gears, you get a gear ratio, I think, of 1 to 256, and that is the slowest speed at which you can run the lead screw, and that's used pretty much exclusively for power feed. When you're cutting threads, you use higher gear ratios, the lead screw turns faster, and you cut various thread pitches. On the left side of the lathe, on the gear cover, there's a chart here that shows the gear combinations used for cutting different imperial threads. And the lathe can cut both imperial and metric threads, but this particular lathe is set up with a SAE thread pitch lead screw, so it will accurately cut all of the SAE threads shown on this chart, and probably some others too. There are some computer programs available online that will generate other combinations of threads beyond what is shown here on this chart. But let's talk about the chart for a minute. Over here it shows the graphic for how 4 gears are set up in a gear train. There's gear A, gear B, gear C, and gear D. So this would be a gear train using 4 gears on 3 different shafts. But there are also certain combinations where you only need 3 gears. You have A, B, and D. Then on the chart, let's look at the example here. The first column is threads per inch. So let's say we wanted a 12 threads per inch thread. And the 3 gears used for that are gear A is a 40 tooth, gear B is a 65 tooth. In this case it's just a 3-gear train, so there's no gear C involved, and then gear D. Now these A, B, C, and D of course correspond to these different shaft positions. So in this case we're only using 3 gears, so I'm only using A, B, and D, and there's no gear in the C position. If we were cutting, let's say 19, well, let's pick one that's a little more common. Well, let's just use 13. And let's say a 1/2 13 thread. In this case we use 4 gears in the train, so we have a 40 tooth A gear, 65 tooth B gear, 60 tooth C gear, and a 30 tooth D gear. So all the gears have the number of teeth marked on them, and so there's a stack of gears that come with the lathe, and I've got them in a little pile here. And you pick out the gears you need according to the table and the pitch that you want to cut, and then you set those up, and I'll give you an example of how that's done. As the lathe comes from the factory, it's set up with these two 80-tooth gears and these two small gears, which I think are 20, but I'm not sure of that. And these form a pitch ratio of 1 to 256. That's the smallest pitch you can get, and that's used for the power feed. So for all other combinations of gear threads, you would use other gears here, as we've seen on the chart. Now let's set up for a 20-tooth or a 20-pitch thread. So the first thing we need to do is remove these gears that are already in place. And I like to use these T-handled wrenches from Harbor Freight. They're pretty handy for this. And this particular arrangement uses two different wrenches. This is a 4mm and this other one is a 5mm. So you got to have two wrenches handy. And once you remove those screws, you can just pop these gears off. And usually when the lathe is new, they're pretty stiff. You may actually have to sort of prise them off using a screwdriver or a pair of screwdrivers. But if you have to do that, just be careful not to damage the gears. These gears are plastic, but they're very, very tough. And it's difficult to break one, but it can be done. For example, if you run the cutting tool into the chuck while it's under power feed, you'll almost certainly break one or more of these gears. But they're inexpensive, and as long as you don't do something drastic like that, they'll last pretty much forever, or for the life of the lathe. So now we have the gears removed. You can see this metal framework here. This is sometimes called the banjo, and the reason for that is on some classic lathes, this metal piece had the rough shape of a banjo, but this one here does not look much like a banjo to me, but sometimes people still call it that. So in case you're wondering, now you know. So let's say we wanted to set up a 20-pitch thread. We need 3 gears for that, a 40, a 65, and a 50-tooth. And let me set those aside, and then we'll get to the next step. Next step is, in order to get the gears to mesh properly, you typically have to loosen this nut here, and that allows this whole arm to swing back and forth. And what that's for is so that you can arrange things so that the gears mesh properly, since they're all different diameters. And you also typically have to get behind here with this little 10mm wrench, and there's a nut back here that you've got to loosen, which is tough to get at. And I'm turning it the wrong way. I should have done that one first, I guess. It would have been easier. Now, let me say that I don't do set up gear trains on this little lathe very often, as you can probably tell. But that's because my big lathe has a quick change gearbox on it. And of course all of this is automated just by setting a few levers. So that's the big advantage of the quick change gearbox, but you don't usually find those until you get up in the lathes with the $2,000 and up price range in 2014 prices. But on less expensive lathes, if they have thread cutting capability at all, it's usually done with these manual change gears. So let me get the gears set up and we'll come back and look at it when I'm done. Alright, I've got my gear train set up here to cut the 20-pitch thread. I've got my 40-tooth gear, my 65-tooth gear, and my 50-tooth gear according to the chart. And I want to check those, make sure there's a little bit of play in it so they're not binding. And then I'm ready to cut threads. Alright, I've got a workpiece here. Not really a very good one, but just to demonstrate. And I'm not going to go into all the details of thread cutting because that's not the purpose of this video. But if you are interested, on the premium content section of MiniLathe.com, there is a detailed tutorial that will go into a lot of the nuances. But I have taken a 20-pitch thread gauge here, and you can see that we did cut a light 20-pitch thread. But while I'm at it, let me mention one other feature of the lathe. Wanted to talk about the threading dial for a minute. The purpose of the threading dial is to make sure that each successive pass of the threads that you're cutting aligns with the previous passes. If you didn't have this, then you might engage the lead screw at the wrong point, and that would cause you to overcut the threads that you've already cut previously. So there's a table that shows you for various thread pitches what number to engage this thread dial. Let's take a look at that in action here. I'll turn on the lathe. You can see with the half nut disengaged, the threading dial rotates. And according to my chart, which I'm not going to show you at this point, but I would look on the chart and it might tell me that I need to engage at the number 1 for a 20 pitch thread. So I'd wait till that 1 comes around and drop the half nut lever in place. And you can see it stops rotating, but now the carriage is moving. Until I disengage it, the carriage stops moving and the threading dial resumes rotation. So now when I back the carriage up to make my next pass, I wait till the 1 comes around, engage the half nut, and that ensures that the next pass that I'm cutting now is exactly aligned with the previous pass, so the threads get deeper on each pass. Now, as you can see, using the threading dial can be a little bit tedious and error prone. If you miss the number, you could end up ruining your thread and having to start all over again, which is not something you want to do. But on this lathe, because it has the variable speed reversible motor, there's another way that you can cut threads without using the threading dial at all. And the trick to that is you simply keep the lead screw engaged, keep the half nut lever engaged the whole time you're cutting the thread, and reverse the carriage using the reversible motor. So we would make one pass like so. Then when we reach the end of that pass, we would retract the cutting tool, reverse the lathe, back the carriage up, all the time keeping the half nut lever engaged. Then we would set our depth again for the next pass, go back into forward, cut our second pass, back the tool out, reverse the lathe, and so forth. So in this situation, we didn't need to use the threading dial at all because we never disengaged the half nut lever, and therefore the threads will be synchronized on each successive pass. So that's a great convenience feature when you're cutting threads. Now, as I think you could see from the example, thread cutting can be kind of a slow and tedious process, and it's easy to make a mistake while you're still learning. But there's a much easier way to cut threads on the lathe, and that's to use a die. This is for cutting outside threads, and of course you can use a tap for cutting inside threads, which is even easier. But you can get a tap or a die holder like this from LittleMachineShop.com, and it mounts in the tailstock, has a number 2 Morse taper, and I have to get the ram out here a little bit more to engage it. And it just pops in there and is held in place by friction. But now this outer part here can slide back and forth, and I have a die mounted in here. It just mounts in with a couple of set screws, and you can put in whatever type of die you need for the thread you want to cut, but these have to be round dies rather than hex. And once you have that in place, you just bring it up to your rotating workpiece and engage the die with the work and let it rotate. And typically you use a little Tommy bar or something in here to give you some extra leverage so that doesn't rotate. And that's an easy way to cut threads using dies, quite a lot quicker and easier than using the threading dial and all that. Now, with that said, there are situations where you want to cut a thread that may be too big, or a non-standard thread of some type that you can't cut with a die. And an example of that would be, say, a thread to go on. Now, although the dies are convenient to use, there are situations where you can't use a die, and this is an example. This is an adapter I made to mount a close-up lens on a video camera that I had, but the thread pitch and diameter of the close-up lens did not match the one on the camera. So I made this adapter ring here by cutting threads on the mini lathe with the proper thread for the close-up lens on one face and the proper thread for the camera on the other face. So obviously you're not going to find a die to do that job, and that's an example of where being able to cut threads comes in handy. If you look in the user manual, you'll find on page 24 that there's a chart of metric thread pitches that can be cut on the mini lathe. These use the same gears in different setups, and you can cut anything from a 0.3 millimeter all the way up to an 8 millimeter thread pitch, and that can be very handy if you don't happen to have a 0.75 millimeter die around the shop and you have a job that you need to do that calls for that thread. You can set it up and cut it on the lathe.